You're listening to the podcast for all of the news, notes, and breakdowns for your Ohio State Buckeyes. This is Sons of the Shoe with Nick Wilson and Spencer German.
Sons of the Shoe is back. Nick Wilson, Spencer German. The impossibly loud theme music, which deafens my old ass every time. But we got a big game this week, obviously. Ohio State, Marshall. We got Ohio State news, some familiar faces coming back. The Marshall head coach, Charles Huff. A lot of funny things to say. Some of that you're going to hear in Four Down territory, but as we are a new show, relatively, please make sure to follow Sons of the Shoe wherever you get your podcast, 92.3 The Fan, the free Odyssey app. Of course, Apple, Spotify. Have I mentioned Apple? Follow Sons of the Shoe today, and don't forget to pop into our comment section on 92.3 The Fan's YouTube channel. Just type in 92.3 The Fan in the search bar on YouTube. Find us. We're under the playlist, and there are like 2 or 3 other things there. But make sure to comment because we love to hear from you guys. But hi, Spencer. How are you?
I'm good, man. It's funny you bring up the YouTube comments. Every week I tell myself, you know what? I'm going to be better this week about going on to YouTube and replying to people's comments for Sons of the Shoe. And then every week I drop the ball. So I don't know what needs to change, but I need to do some soul searching, have a little pep talk with myself and figure out how to make that more of a thing. Because we do appreciate you guys getting in the comments. I know Nick is always jumping in and commenting with you guys, and I've really dropped the ball on that end, so I apologize.
That's all right. I've dropped the ball on the podcast in general since summer. So I guess
true.
I guess turnabout is fair play there. Right. But obviously one of the big talking points has been the emergence of Jeremiah Smith. And I think it's easy at this point of the year to say things like it's only 2 games or it's only MAC competition. Every single year there, Spencer, we have Ohio State guys that are, just in and out. This recruit's going to come in and do this. This recruit's going to, and 99% of the time it doesn't happen, or it doesn't happen till later in their freshman season. Sometimes it doesn't happen till later in their career. Sometimes it doesn't happen at all. So it's funny that I understand the pump your brakes mentality on let's not get too crazy about Jeremiah Smith, but you still can't look at this and go like this is non-typical for any freshman in Ohio State history, sans 1 or 2 guys. That's no matter who you play, that's pretty damn impressive.
Yeah, and I know there was a tweet last week that basically captured somebody went in and basically like mapped out every great receiver that's come through the halls of Ohio State and their first and really he tracked their entire first season. It's not even just their first 2 games. And Jeremiah Smith's already on pace to like shatter some of the greats of all time that have come through Ohio State. The numbers here were only 9 Ohio State true freshman wide receivers have had more catches over the course of a season. And this is just accounting for Jeremiah Smith's first 2 games. So through his first 2 games, he only 9 true freshmen have had more catches throughout an entire season. Only 6 have had more yards, and only 4 have had more touchdowns. So like he's seen 6 quarters of action and he's already out here doing ridiculous things. And yeah, like it's funny because we talked all offseason about like how involved he was going to be in this Ohio State offense. How much time was he going to see? And we debated that. We had some fun with it. But I don't know that I don't know that either of us really properly forecasted how involved he was going to be from the jump, because I think we kind of just figured like, well, true freshman wide receivers, he's going to be talented, but how much playing time is he really going to get when you got all these other guys in front of him like Carnell Tate and Brandon Inniss, where it's like, how involved is he really going to be? But he's been involved, as we've seen in the first 2 games, and it's been crazy. And I just can I am like now at a point where it's impossible to put any sort of cap on what I think he can do this year and obviously beyond in his Ohio State career, because he is just that damn good. And to your point, like it's MAC competition, I get it, but no, like that touchdown against Western Michigan where he catches the slant and he's just gone, like that was clearly that was clearly the evidence of a guy that, yeah, there's a talent discrepancy there. and he was making those guys look silly because he should. But that's the type of talent that also shines through on the bigger stages when you're playing better teams too.
Yeah, I think what's wild about it is he's made Emeka Ibuka, who's probably a first-round pick this year, look pedestrian. And that's no, like, Emeka's not doing anything wrong, but
No.
it is just the talent with Jeremiah just pops off the tape so evidently. And it's so funny. Like, I understand the rush to compare him to all-time great wide receivers in their freshman year. To me, this is bigger than that. This is like Maurice Clarett, his freshman year. This is Andy Katzenmoyer, his freshman year. I know that there are a couple others that we can kind of pop up there, certainly from those like the 2000 teens teams as well. But like when it just comes to pure freshman year, like, oh my God, the first two names that like it's right on par with through two games is Maurice Clarett and Andy Katzenmoyer, two of my favorite Ohio State players of all time.
Yeah, I think those are fair comparisons. Obviously, Clarett is somebody that people remember very vividly, excuse me, because the national championship that year and all those different things that came with it. But yeah, I mean, it's rare that you get a talent like this is the point. Because and think about it, like we've seen so many great receivers come through that program in recent history, especially, and we're already saying 2 games in that he's on track to be better than like even the guys you think of off the top of your head recently. Your Garrett Wilsons, your Chris Olaves, your Marvin Harrison Jr. Like I had the take obviously this offseason that the moment Marvin Harrison Jr. got drafted into the NFL, he would be a top 10 receiver in football. I know the first game of his NFL career didn't go too well. His second game had his kind of breakout performance, obviously with the Cardinals this past weekend, but like Jeremiah Smith, I think is already on that trajectory, which is crazy. Like if he was eligible to be in the draft at the end of the season, I might feel like he's already a top 10 receiver in the NFL, which is just insane. But yeah, I think those are 2 good comps in terms of other guys that have put up just wildly insane numbers in their first years. And I can't help but feel like excited about the prospects of this season plays out. And we get to the end of the year, and maybe it ends in a national championship, and we have that to kind of hang our hat on. But that we're all looking back, years from now, like, man, you remember Jeremiah Smith? Do you remember how good that guy was in his freshman season, and what he meant to that Ohio State team that potentially wins a national championship? Like, this is the stuff of history books. This is the stuff of Ohio State lore that you look back on and you feel like really excited to reminisce about in years to come.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you say that. I think guys like Jeremiah Smith buck the inflexibility of the NFL system. And whether it was him or one of the Mike Williamses, we all remember, Maurice Clarett, Adrian Peterson, like there are certain guys that come into college football that are just ready to even take that next step. And I think in this era of player freedom and player empowerment, I do wonder if we eventually get to the point where the NFL realizes that that there should be special exemptions. And like every 5 years we get a guy that we think like this dude could ball out tomorrow if you put him on the Cleveland Browns or if you put him with Pat Mahomes. And it's Jeremiah. Like I have no doubt through 2 games. Think about how insane that is. I have no doubt that this kid could walk into the NFL and take over an NFL game. And that is, like, honestly, I said every 5 years. We're probably talking every 10 years because the last guy that I can remember at that level is probably Adrian Peterson. Maybe there's somebody in between him and AP, but, man, I don't know.
I mean, I'm trying to rack my brain here quickly, but I think AP seems like the logical answer for that question specifically. Like I don't think there was anybody after that, was there? Like maybe Derrick Henry, because that dude was just built like a Mack truck. But I don't even know if his freshman year, I don't know if he had like massive numbers though.
Well, and remember, Derek didn't really hit his stride until like year 3 or 4 in the
Yeah.
NFL.
And now there's
Like,
just that picture of him standing at midfield at the national championship game where he everyone is just a dwarf compared to him, and
they
he's like
stand.
barely sticking out of his shirt, and you're like, oh wow, this guy is massive. I have to tackle that today.
So I also think it's interesting. Like there are so many different barriers or there's not barriers. There's so many different ways to classify the success for a season. Obviously, beating Michigan is the first benchmark, and
Yeah.
winning a national championship is the next barrier after that, or the next benchmark after that. In between that is winning the Heisman. And if you had asked me who I thought on this team had the best chance to win a Heisman, we always go to quarterbacks. I think it'd be pretty. It's way, way, way early to suggest Will Howard can. But again, at this point, he could put up some gaudy numbers. You never know. But I would have probably gone if we weren't talking about the actual quarterback position. I probably would have gone running back with Travion. I don't think Ibuka's that caliber. JT Tuimoloau is a hell of a football player, but you know how tough it is for a defensive player to win that award. So I do think like now all of a sudden Jeremiah through 2 games, if this production continues, and again for me, it's the conversation begins when you get into Big Ten play against Michigan State. If you get into Big Ten play and it's Michigan State, Iowa, and then Oregon, those are each one of those games escalates, and I think that perfectly escalates the hype of, well, you go into Michigan State, that's your first opponent, maybe you put up 100 yards, you do the same against Iowa, people are going to start to talk. And then especially if you do it against Oregon in that matchup, that'll be kind of the vintage game, the perfect opportunity to kind of make his case, halfway through the season. And then of course the Michigan game can be the thing that sinks or swim that Heisman idea.
Yeah, it's again, obviously we're talking just 2 games, but I don't think it's far fetched to mention him in that category if he continues doing what he's doing and puts up the numbers that he's putting up. And obviously, like you said, there will be barriers there in future games when you're playing better teams that prevent him from just going off the way he has. But I don't think it's that crazy though, Nick. Because and here's the other thing: I don't know. Some years you go into a season and there's like an obvious answer, right, to who the Heisman winners are going to be or who the Heisman candidates are going to be. There's a lot of talk about like Shedeur Sanders being in that conversation this year if Colorado finds ways to win with their terrible offensive line. He's obviously yeah, that's not happening. And like Dylan Gabriel in Oregon is one. Carson Beck in Georgia is obviously one. The quarterbacks all come to mind, and maybe Will Howard enters that conversation. But like in a year where you don't have somebody that you feel like is a clear-cut answer, I think this is the perfect storm for somebody like Jeremiah Smith to kind of steal that spotlight. If he continues being like the number 1 target of Will Howard, he puts up massive numbers. And you're right, like those games at the end of the season are where it matters. And that was the same thing. We spent a number of shows last year talking about Marvin Harrison Jr. and his Heisman odds, and the sports information department at Ohio State was sending us the packets of their campaign, if you will, for Marvin, and it had all this different information in it. Like we were trying to sort of give some credence to that and boost it up and join the parade, if you will, of people saying Marvin Harrison Jr. should be in consideration. But that all was dependent on beating Michigan, and we like if that ball by Kyle McCord doesn't get intercepted because he gets hit, and Marvin Harrison Jr. catches it, it looked like he had a clear run to the end zone potentially for a touchdown. Maybe we're talking about a world where Marvin Harrison Jr. is the Heisman winner. So it's just interesting. But yeah, like it's hard for receivers to win it. There's only been 3 in the history of the sport: Tim Brown, Desmond Howard, and Devonta Smith, most recently in 2020. But I do think Smith kind of paved the way for that to be more of a realistic possibility in today's version of college football. So I don't see why it's out of the question. If he keeps putting up the numbers like this, and that would be unprecedented for a freshman wide receiver to do it. But man, oh man, if he's on the trajectory that he's on, and he can do that against the good teams, like you mentioned, the Michigans, the Oregons, etc., I think he's definitely in the running, because I don't know that there's like a clear-cut answer this year.
So I will say, Quinn Ewers from Texas is going to be at front of that conversation.
I can't forget him. That was my bad.
Well, I think Cam Ward in Miami.
Him being healthy matters too, though, because obviously he just got hurt. I don't think it's serious, but yeah.
Yeah, I think Cam Ward in Miami is starting to put up some video game numbers. That's super early too. Cam has been great at Washington State, and I can't remember where it was before. But like Cam is a great player, but like that's early. But if they keep putting up those numbers, I think that's there.
I think
And the
it'll
kid,
also depend on what Miami does. Like if
that's
Miami
fair.
falls on its face in the ACC championship game or something, they don't make the playoff or something like that, or somehow, I think
Mhm.
that would obviously impact that as well. But yeah,
And I'm not going to attempt to pronounce this name. I nailed DJ Uiagalelei for a very long
we
time.
know he ain't winning the Heisman.
Well, no, he's not going to. But I'm using that to say that I know how to pronounce a lot of really complicated names. I cannot land the Tennessee quarterback's name to say Nico is what I'm going to call him. I think he's putting up some video game numbers too. Granted, it was against Kent State, but that's a really, really, really good Tennessee team. So just from a quarterback perspective, I think those guys are out there. But it's interesting you mentioned Marvin Harrison Jr. And this is, I think I will say the word of caution is I still think what Marvin did last year and this is not a knock. Kyle has performed very well in his several games at Syracuse, but last year Kyle had ball placement issues, general accuracy issues, confidence issues, performance issues. The man was a walking, talking football ED campaign, and what the numbers that Marvin put up with Kyle McCord are still some of the most impressive numbers I've ever seen. Because he did that with half a season without Travion. Ibuka was hurt. I mean, he was the one guy on the field. If he didn't have a big game, you were SOL. So I will say, I still think Marvin, what he did in his final year in Columbus, might be the most singular performance of a wide receiver I've ever seen. But I think it'll be interesting, even if Jeremiah doesn't challenge that for this year. I think you can start to see that he is of the caliber to make that kind of challenge. So we're going to follow up on this, by the way. If Spencer has something there. My dog's losing his shit. Don't worry. He's a dog. They do that. But when we come back, we are going to get you guys a preview for the Marshall game next, right here on Sons of the Shoe. But first, a quick word from our sponsors. Spencer, I like that we've now made this a family podcast. We've heard, little Spencer in the background previously. He's made his debut. We got Mongo, my Labrador, that has now made his debut. Like, I feel like we're like the Partridge family of podcasts about Ohio State football.
I think one of your girls one time made an appearance on the video. Even like she came and kind of stood with you momentarily.
Oh, that's right.
So, yeah.
That was right. That was
I don't know which of your daughters it was, but I remember one of them.
I mean, if you just say one of the Wilson girls, you cover a lot of bases there. Like, it's so funny. Like, obviously my daughters are now into that preteen or teenage era. And even now with the twins, I screw it up. Like, I'll be like, and usually it's so funny because I used to get so pissed. My Nike mama, who is from Hungary, she would start at the oldest kid's name when she would get flustered and pissed at us, and it'd be like, and she would go in like birth order until she got to you, and then she'd be like, "Yeah, Nick, that's the one I'm mad at right now." And I'd be like, I'm an ogre. My older brother, who's the oldest grandkid, is like 5'9", 150 pounds. We don't like we're brothers, full-blooded brothers, but we are just built wild. There's no confusing us. Like he's quiet and thoughtful. I'm loud and obnoxious. And now that I have my twin daughters, the amount of times I've been like, whichever one you are, and they get just as pissed as I used to get at my grandmother.
So, well, I've experienced the getting the name wrong thing in my family because my mom used to call me my brother, which is funny because my brother looks basically like my son, where he's got orange, like bright orange hair. And I look nothing like him in that way, but she always used to call me his name. So that was always, my mom would. It was funny when she'd get mad at us. But the other thing I was going to say, I don't envy the fact that you have twins because I am the worst at I guess it's different when it's your twins because you're around them and you know what they look like and you see them all the time. But I have two sets of twins in my family. And every time I see those, they're cousins of mine. And every time I see them, I'm like, wait, you're this one and that one. And then I actually just met for the first time the other set of twins in my family that's also cousins when I was down in Jacksonville this past weekend. And they told me their names when I first got there. And that night I knew them because I remembered what color shirt each one was wearing. And then the next morning, all bets were off and I had no idea which one was which. I have the worst time with twins.
So we were lucky, even in the womb, each child distinguished themselves with their energy and Izzy was always like bumping around. She was the one that you would see like poking through, popping out. She was the one that like in the middle of the night would just start playing bongos on her mom. And like, so when they came out, the personalities, like they've never changed. Like when I remember, my sister and I are like 18 months apart, and my younger brother and I are basically Irish twins. So I remember between the three of us, there was little changes in personalities, you know what I mean? And for my sister, like there was a time where I was like 7 and I was super extroverted when I was really young. And at 7, I just turned off for like a decade. And my older sister shined as bright as she ever has shown. So there was like a clear switch. It has not happened with my kids. They're the same. My twins are the same people that they were born. Oh gosh, can't carry the 2. Almost 11 years ago.
That's
They're the
crazy.
same. And it's the weirdest thing because every other siblings I know, the twins are like, yeah, I was this way once and then we switched and then this, that, and the other. No, my twins are, my Izzy is my doppelganger. My Sophie is my wife's doppelganger emotionally. And it is combustible. It is wild because Vanessa and I get along really, really well. These girls are our doppelgangers, and they are best friends or sworn enemies, and it is overwhelming for somebody who is a easily disturbed and empathetic person.
Well, I can appreciate that though, that they at least are identifiable by their personalities. Because I already know I would struggle with that, and I pray for that reason. Knock on wood, my desk here is wood. That I never have twins.
I pray that you do. Now.
Well,
it's actually a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. So we do have this Marshall.
Don't put that on me, Ricky Bobby.
Don't you put that on me. So we do have this Marshall game coming up. Big noon kickoff is going to be in Columbus this weekend. It's a 12 p.m. kick. Obviously, Marshall coming to Ohio Stadium here, and this is interesting. Like the Akron team is clearly probably one of the bottom 20 teams in Division I, whatever we call it anymore. You look at Western Michigan, they're one of the 3 or 4 best teams in the MAC, but the Sun Belt is one step or a half step up off the MAC, and Marshall's probably the second most talented team. And I think stylistically, it's really interesting. They run the air raid offense. Their defense 2 years ago was really, really good. I think they're back to being that defense. So I expect Ohio State to have their way with Marshall on Sunday. But this is another one of those games where because it's a step up in competition, you can't sleep on Marshall because they have just enough talent, specifically on defense. They got a hell of a defensive line. The kid, now I got to look at my note because I'm going to forget his damn name. He's already got 3.5 sacks this year. Mike Green. He is a junior or a sophomore. This kid is a truly tremendous edge rusher. So sneakily a nice team for Marshall. And I still think Ohio State should roll, but this will be one of those teams you cannot sleep on because they can make this game uncomfortable if you do.
Yeah, I know. I think that's a good way to put it in sort of perspective. I think it's interesting. I don't know that they gave like Virginia Tech a scare per se, but I think the fact that they played Virginia Tech pretty closely is the identifier that this is, a step up in competition from what the Buckeyes have seen the first couple weeks of the season in 2 MAC schools. And so, yeah, like you definitely can't take them lightly, and they're going to be a team that challenges you a little bit more. And I think that's what's interesting about Ohio State's schedule is I understand it's Marshall and people aren't necessarily going to this game thinking it's going to be anything, other than an Ohio State win. But we talked about it, Nick, like the steady sort of progress through to when you finally get to Big Ten play, which is coming on the other side of next week against Michigan State. You play Akron, which is basically a big payday for Akron. And they did some interesting things. First game of the season, you work out some kinks and you get through some things and you're on your way. Then you play Western Michigan, who's a step up in the MAC. And now you're getting a Marshall team that I do think will test you in some ways and make you have to sort of, really make sure you're on your P's and Q's, that you're not, just taking them lightly. And that, I think, is a good sort of warm up to then the Big Ten schedule that obviously awaits on the other side. And I think their defense is going to challenge Ohio State a little bit more. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see, early on, it takes some feeling out from the Ohio State offense. I think offensively, I'm interested to see how Ohio State, because they've struggled in recent years against dual threat quarterbacks. I'm interested to see how they play against Stone Earl, who's the quarterback for.
It's a great name.
Yeah, it is. It's a great football name for sure.
Like, here's the thing. If his talent matched his name, the guy'd be a Hall of Famer. Seriously, Stone Earl.
Yeah, that's great.
My lily white ass name is Nick Wilson. Like, there's no to quote the kids, there's no aura points with Nick Wilson. There are massive aura points with the name Stone Earl.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's an awesome football name. Sometimes you hear those names, like anytime you get like a baseball player whose name is like Cleat, you're like, oh, what a perfect basebone name. But Stone Earl feels
Trot Nixon.
Yeah, that's a good one. Trot Nixon is a great baseball name. But yeah, I think Stone Earl falls in that same category for football players. But yeah, I mean, he doesn't have like the greatest completion percentage of all time. He's completed less than like 50% of his passes. But
he is kind of the weak link here. They've got good wide receivers, good running back. The O-line's pretty good. Stone Earl is the biggest. Can this guy be better than he was in the first couple of weeks of the season?
Yeah, but I'm what I'm curious about specifically with him, like I was saying, was just his dual threat ability, and I do think that's going to be the priority for Marshall, is going to be using him as a runner. And along those lines, AJ Turner, who's their top running back, who's put up some decent numbers here in the first couple of weeks. 222 yards. He's got a touchdown as well. The RPO / those style plays, using those guys in that way, I think is going to be something that Ohio State has to account for. And I'm curious to see how they handle that, because that is something they'll see throughout the year. You'll see some of that, I'm assuming, from Oregon a little bit, because they like to use some of that speed stuff. And it's a good test for that, because I remember a couple of years ago playing Toledo, and Toledo had a dual threat quarterback. His name escapes me at the moment, but
Finn.
That's it, Finn. Yeah, and they struggled against him. So this is what you look for in these games, right, Nick? Is like the little things that a team might do well, that's lower tier to Ohio State, or not quite on the level of Ohio State, and how they handle those things, because that's almost like a look into the crystal ball of, okay, how is this going to look now against teams that have better players at those positions?
Listen, I think for Marshall, I think the air raid offense is always something interesting. You've mentioned the wrinkle of having a dual threat quarterback. This is a really, really, really nice Sun Belt team. I don't know that they'll get ranked this year, but they're probably in the upper 60 of college football, maybe upper 70 of college football. Here, to me, the most important matchup, if we're talking about what does Ohio State need to prove, this is another opportunity for the offensive line to prove itself. And, this Marshall team is 5, 6, 7 deep of really good defensive linemen. As a matter of fact, I think 5 of their defensive linemen have already registered sacks this season. So this is one of those, especially with a speed off the edge, with a guy like Green, that you do – like this could be a test. And I'm saying could, because I think a lot of people felt like the offensive line progressed from 1 week to 2 weeks there to the Western Michigan matchup. I'll say this. Akron gave you fits week 1. Akron has a nice D-line for a MAC school.
Yeah.
Marshall has just a good D-line. Like there are a couple guys, including Mike Green, that I think you could just put into certain Power 5 schools, and I think they'd be instantly productive. So to me, that's the spot where it's like, if the offensive line is who they were against Western Michigan, this game should be a 50-point rout. If the offensive line struggles, you're going to be relying on the pass game, because you're not going to run as well. And that's how you muck this game up and turn it into something closer to Akron, where, what was it, 17-7, 17-3 at the half, something like that.
17-3, yeah. But yeah, no, I like where your head's at with that, because that is, Mike Green being one of the defensive ends on this team. that is the big area that we go into each week, kind of like waiting to assess and see where they're at. And I do fall into the line of, or into the belief of that Ohio State's O-line looked better in the Western Michigan game. I thought they were getting some more push downfield, but we know their defensive line was nothing to write home about. We talked about that in our preview of that game versus especially Akron, who we thought had a good defensive line for a MAC school. But yeah, this is, I think, another level up from that. Mike Green sort of being at the forefront of it. But like you said, there are a number of guys that can cause some problems, I think, even from the linebacking group. I think Landon Watson has a couple sacks this year. So there's some, they're going to be tested, I think, in that front seven of Marshall. And that's why I think, like we talked about what you're preparing for defensively, the dual threat quarterback and all that. On the flip side, like the offense is now getting a better test of that part of the defense specifically. And I'm curious to see how they approach that. Now it'll help, and I know we're going to talk about this coming up, that you get Donovan Jackson back for this game, and your offensive line will now be at full strength. But if they don't go out and exude their will, if you will, Nick, on this team and prove that, like, okay, this group is coming along, there will continue to be questions, especially as you get into Big Ten play, and probably a little bit of nervousness from Buckeyes fans about what this thing's going to look like when you have to play some tougher defenses. Like, I mean, that's the thing we're still saying about Michigan, is their defense is still going to be really good. It's just their offense that has some questions, and obviously teams like Oregon and etc.
So the line on this game through our friends at FanDuel as we record this podcast is at 40 points on the dot. I think what's interesting is there's the push and pull of their D-line versus your O-line, which we've talked about. I think you should win that. So I go into this thinking you should, but understand you might not. Here's the other thing that I think really, if you wanted to take the over, if you wanted to take the over, if you wanted to lay the points and just take Ohio State, I think the biggest reason to do so is Ohio State has not played in 2 weeks. So they've had 2 weeks to prepare for this game. They came out in that Western Michigan game and just put the boots to them. There's no reason to believe it's not like you're looking ahead to Michigan State and worried about that juggernaut just yet. So if we're talking about, do you take Marshall and the points, if we're just from that standpoint, or do you go ahead and lay the 40 with Ohio State? This is the time where I think there's considerable reasons to lay the points and just take Ohio State.
See, I don't know. Like, I kind of feel maybe the other way about it a little bit, just because of the fact, and I guess Marshall's coming off of a bye too, so maybe it's an irrelevant point. But I just kind of feel like Ohio State, it seemed like week 1 was kind of feeling some things out. Week 2, they then came out and played really good football and took a step in the right direction. And then we talked about how we hate that early season bye being in week 3 of the season randomly. And I almost wonder if that was almost like, okay, now you got to kind of get yourself back ready to go for another game. And then you got this stretch of games where you're going to play sort of consecutively rather than having another bye week that you got to get ready for. So I wonder if there'll be almost like a malaise about Ohio State when things first start out, and it could be like a slow start for them. And then they'll pick things up in the second half, and maybe that's enough to cover. But I wonder if that maybe keeps it a little bit closer, especially early on, than what Vegas is saying.
All right, guys. How do you look at this game? Do you look at this game as a easy cover by Ohio State and going over those 40 points? And also, what do you think is the biggest factor in this game? Let us know in the comments. At Nick Wilson Says, at Spencito _ as well on X. When we come back, it's time for 4 Down Territory. But first, a quick word from our sponsors. All right, guys, final segment of today's podcast. And as you guys know, heading into the games, we do not do the Michigan Panic Meter. It also doesn't help that Michigan has sucked. Sorry, that's Tiger got out of the cage there. That they've not been as good as recent history, and that they're juggling quarterbacks. So instead, we go to 4 Down Territory. Spencer, what is our first down of 4 Down Territory?
Yeah, first down this week, Nick, is actually related to Michigan, who, as you so eloquently said, has sucked to start the beginning of the year. We're really begging the Michigan fans to get in our comments on the 92 the Fan
Oh,
YouTube channel.
please, no, don't do that. That doesn't help our views. Don't do that. By the
But
way,
go ahead.
fire Sharon Moore. I'm just going to keep saying things to bait Michigan fans.
Hey, he
They
just
should
signed his
rescind.
contract last week. They actually allowed him to sign it after he got
Getting
blown
his
up by
ass beat by
Texas. Yeah.
Texas.
So that
They
was interesting.
also should rescind that national title. That's 92 through the Fans YouTube channel. Go ahead and just search in, Sons of the Shoe in there. You'll find us. Go ahead and comment there. We'd hate if you'd commented for us. All right, what's the first down turn?
Well, the turmoil continues at Michigan because they are making a quarterback change. Davis Warren was the starter to start the year, which I think actually was kind of surprising to people anyway, even Michigan fans. But they have now made the change to the player that we thought was going to be the starting quarterback from the start of the season with an excellent name. It's not quite a great football name per se. It's just a great name in general. Alex Orji takes over at quarterback. Is this something that you're a little bit nervous about, worried about at all, Nick?
We went from a U.S. Senator and Davis Warren to the all-time party name Alex Orji. Listen, if they're going to have a chance to be good, Orji has to take this job and he has to run with it. He really does. So, I think it was the obvious move. Davis Warren looked lesser Cade McNamara, which is not something you want. And yeah, I don't think it's a panic move, but I do think it's a reactionary move to how bad the Texas game looked. And I think from Michigan's standpoint, if you can get Orji comfortable by the time, the bulk of Big Ten season comes around, that makes a lot of sense. Even if you can't, trying to get him ready for next year, or at least being able to say definitively one way or another, is a huge, huge, huge thing for them. So I'm surprised it took them this long, because anybody who watched Davis Warren saw an average-ass quarterback, but inevitably I do think this is the right move for Michigan.
Yeah, I agree. I think my biggest question, in terms of it being the right move for Michigan, my biggest question is remains why the hell they didn't do this from the start. That's the question I think I'm going to have, and I'm sure that Michigan fans have too, as to because here's the thing, it's not like Jim Harbaugh starting Davis Warren. It might have been like, okay, maybe Jim Harbaugh sees something in Davis Warren that he's like, I can get more out of this guy in my offense, but Sharon Moore starting Davis Warren when we all kind of assumed it was going to be Alex Orji. It's like, I don't think Sharon Moore is the quarterback whisperer that we thought that Jim Harbaugh was, that we said Jim Harbaugh was. So it was a little perplexing from the start, but we'll have to see how it all shakes out. I don't know that Ohio State fans should be nervous about it. I don't think this makes Michigan all of a sudden this massive, title contender or anything like that. They're still a team that's, restocking after the run last year. But yeah, it's something to keep an eye on, because I think he brings something to the table that probably Davis Warren just didn't have. So
I do think, to what you said right there, I do think this is a move with Ohio State in mind. Because if you're going to be an 8-win or 9-win team this year, the best thing you can do is get the quarterback with the highest potential ready for that game. What do we have for second down?
Yeah, as we move to second down, Nick, there was a big story today out of Tennessee, who's having, as you mentioned earlier in the show, a resurgent year, great offense to go along with a great defense for once in their lives. And they announced to their fans that they are adding a 10% talent fee onto their ticket prices next year for those who purchase tickets. And so this is we could probably spend really an entire segment talking about just this topic, because I find it fascinating from a number of different angles. But the idea that an SEC team is doing this, I think the biggest thing that stands out to me, Nick, is that I don't think they're going to be the first team to do this. Like, I think the rest of college football, especially all the D1 programs, are going to now look around and be like, oh, well, that's interesting. And their ears perk up when they hear something like this, because I think a lot of these other schools are going to now follow suit and do something similar in years to come.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is it is the ultimate test case. If this goes well for Tennessee and it doesn't impact their season ticket base, it will be monkey see, monkey do as soon as halfway through this season or next season. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see who tries this. I also think my initial takeaway is teams are doing everything they can to separate out their money from the money that goes to athletes, because I think they're terrified of the slippery slope. One, we've got several colleges, several college football teams across sports trying to unionize. So if you unionize, all of a sudden, like the worst thing to Tennessee or to Ohio State or Alabama is you go from, well, here's your $10 per ticket, which is a couple $100,000 per game across 100 guys. So here's that, versus what you have in modern Major League sports, which is it's a 51-49 split, or it's a 52-48 split. So I look at this as a proactive jump on, well, it's not our money, it's their money. And I think that's, I honestly, I think this is super clever. I also think it's super kind of crappy. I mean, I think it's just another thing. Passing the baton off, or passing some of the thing off here to average fans, is nonsense. That's why you have boosters.
Well,
that's why you have billion-dollar TV deals. It is disgusting that they're doing this, but I will say now, much like Thanos, it is inevitable.
Well, and I think with another part of this that's fascinating to me is just the thought that, because it's not just like Tennessee fans who are buying these tickets, like maybe season tickets, yes, but like they open up the single game tickets at some point to other people. So in some ways, like you're going to have Alabama fans paying your student athletes in some capacity when they're coming in and they're like, well, hey, Alabama plays at Tennessee this year. I want to go buy some tickets to that game. And then they go in. And so it's almost like you're not only taking money from your own fans, you're taking money on a lower level or a smaller level from other fan bases that you're competing directly against. And I think that's another kind of interesting part of this as well. But yeah, I do think it's a slippery slope where other teams are going to see this and start to follow suit.
What is third down there, my friend?
Yeah, I'm actually going to flip these because I want to end on the sort of funny commentary from Charles Huff here. But third down, we go back to Ohio State specifically, and we talked about it a little bit earlier, mentioned it a little bit earlier. Donovan Jackson, the starting left guard for the Buckeyes, set to return this game. We talked about the importance of the offensive line in this one against a good Marshall defensive line and in front seven. Is this the thing, Nick, that unlocks this offensive line group and where you're going to leave a game and feel really, really good about this offensive line for the Buckeyes moving forward?
No, mostly because my concern last year, I mean, it was unilateral, but I really thought the tackles are where you were hurt most last year. That being said, Donovan was probably their best offensive line player last year, but I still don't know he was great. You know what I mean? Like it's this catch-22 of, yeah, he's their best player, but how good is he really compared to some of the other standouts in college football? So I will say, like, I'm a little torn on this because my biggest doubt on the O-line still happens to be the tackle spot.
It's a fair point. And I do think, the thing that Donovan Jackson, I think, is remembered most for right now from last year is that he gave up the hit on Kyle McCord that led to the interception that lost in the Michigan game. So he certainly is out there trying to prove. Now, the consensus around scouts is that he's the best one on this line because he's the one projected to go first in the draft next year and all these different things. But yeah, I mean, I think he comes in with something to prove. And I hope that it's the thing that really gets this offensive line sort of running and functioning well together. But I need to see that to believe it first because I think we all still have some questions there. That'll bring us to fourth down, Nick.
Yeah, I'm ready for it.
And fourth down is probably my favorite topic of the entire episode today because Marshall head coach Charles Huff, he's been around. He has coached a lot of different places throughout his career. He's coached
I thought you meant sexually.
Yeah, he's hanging out with Alex Orgy. So
he has plowed through half of Virginia.
He's coached 4 national title contending teams. He's coached against national title contending teams. And he had an interesting way of trying to lure some of these Ohio State players that he watched on tape this week to come play for Marshall instead. We have a clip for you here. Here's what he had to say.
I'd love to have some of those guys from Ohio State too. So if they want to transfer on down, we've got a Tudor's Biscuit NIL, all you can eat. So if any of those guys that run really, really fast at Ohio State like Tudor's Biscuits, I promise you, all you can eat all day if you transfer here. So, but yeah.
It's really funny. That's
so
really,
good.
really funny.
I can't. So I've never actually had. Have you had Tudor's biscuits? Are they? I've never
No,
actually had Tudor's biscuits,
but
but I can only imagine it's really good because his biscuits are amazing.
the name is Tudor's Biscuits. If you like, I don't know if anybody's ever heard of a nickname for a fart as an air biscuit. So Tudor's Biscuit throw me off a little bit. But here's the thing: what I will tell you is, the farther south you get in this country, they don't play about biscuits, man.
No, they do not.
So, whether it's Biscuitville, whether it's honestly even the big chains like Bojangle with their Bowberry biscuits or their normal biscuits, when somebody stakes their claim on biscuits, you believe them and you go there. And like, I want to say one of the big biscuit menu items was like a brisket biscuit, which sounds fun to say, but it had like, I mean, it just looked,
10 times fast.
It looked like Alex Orgy's name. That's what it looked like to me.
Yeah, no, listen, I'm never somebody to turn on a biscuit. I would say one of my favorite things to eat in a splurge when I'm looking for something for breakfast is just going to Chick-fil-A and getting me, chicken on a biscuit. And I've never actually had like anything. I've had Bojangles one time. I had nothing on a biscuit, but I can only imagine that the biscuits of Bojangles are incredible, as you brought that up in this conversation. So now I'm just dreaming about biscuits. But yeah, I would say if I was an Ohio State player, an all-you-can-eat biscuit deal is at least enough to make me think about it. Marshall's never going to pay me the type of money that like Caleb Downs is making an absurd amount of money, I'm sure, at Ohio State. He'll never get that at Marshall. But if somebody throws at you and says, hey, all-you-can-eat biscuits, I at least think about it. I'm not saying I take it. I take it home for a night. I say, hey, this is an interesting thought. Let's just make sure we, dot all our I's and cross all our T's before we say no. And then you politely come back and say, listen, it sounds like a great deal, but I got to say no because I make enough money that I can just buy a bunch of biscuits from Tudor's whenever I want.
Well, Spencer, you're a skill player. All right. This is not aimed at you. This is not aimed at the Josh
Ohio State
Downs.
Doesn't really recruit offensive linemen very well. So if you're trying to lure offensive linemen, I don't know if he wants those offensive
This
linemen.
is at this is at Tyleik Williams. This is at Hamilton. This is at all the biggins up front. This is at Donovan Jackson. This is Josh Simmons. This is an offer. No wonder that Charles Huff has routinely had the best defensive line or second best defensive line in the Sun Belt. When you're luring fatties anywhere, you start with biscuits. Especially, they got a couple dudes from Charlotte there. They got a couple dudes from, oh my gosh, they got a Georgia kid, a Tennessee kid. When you start trying to lure the fatties out of the South, you do it with unlimited free biscuits.
Hey, this just kind of hit me as you were bringing this up. I just joked about Ohio State now recruiting offensive linemen very well. Maybe this is a playbook for Ryan Day. Hey, copycat lead. We just talked about all these other teams are going to copy Tennessee's, 10% talent charge. Why not find a company locally in Columbus that will give somebody an all-you-can-eat biscuit deal? And then maybe Ohio State will start getting some of these top-tier offensive linemen to come to school there. Who knows?
I would like to point out that any of the great biscuit providers in the world, I can be bought.
This show can be bought. We just both told you how we love biscuits. So
I have no athleticism left. If your expectation is for me to play football, I have got nothing for you. But if you need a really large guy to eat a lot of biscuits and provide entertainment value, I'll be your biscuit slut.
I'll be your biscuit
all right?
slut.
You can clap these cheeks for biscuits. And I've been saying that for a while. Everybody who knows me knows that about Nick Wilson. All right, final one here. Prediction for this game on Saturday at Ohio Stadium. I'm going to go Ohio State 50. God, math is hard. 56. And Marshall, I'm going to give them 6 points.
Only 6, huh?
Yeah. Ohio State should this should be this should be the next year. If Western Michigan was the notch up on Akron, yes, you're facing that next level of talent. Ohio State should roll in this game. I want to see dominance.
I like that. So they put up 14 points on Virginia Tech, which is a team that I think is not quite at the level of Ohio State. I'm gonna say Ohio State wins 48. I'll say 48-10 is the final score. I think Marshall will score a late touchdown in this one when it's kind of garbage time and Ohio State has it in hand, but they'll get held to a field goal otherwise. And the starters continue their streak on defense of not allowing any offensive touchdowns or really any touchdowns to this point in the season. I'll say 48-10.
Someone's taken Marshall in the points. Spencer, great stuff today. Again, guys, follow the show wherever you get your podcast. Apple, Spotify, 92.3 The Fan, the free Odyssey app. Have I mentioned Apple? Follow Sons of the Shoe. And even though Spencer leaves you hanging, I don't in the 92.3 The Fan YouTube comments. You will feel my presence. You will taste the biscuit on 92.3 The Fan's YouTube channel. Check us out there, guys. Go Bucks!
Go Bucks!